hopefully you can hear me. I had some problems with this broadcast today. I'm not really sure exactly why, so let me know if you're hearing this okay, and I'll start again. Something is definitely interfering with this show today. Anyway, on today's program I wanted to talk about two things: about the violence that we've seen on our TV screens happening all across, not the United Kingdom, but all across England, because the same kind of violence has not been seen in Scotland or Wales, although there has been some attacks performed in Northern Ireland. But instead of focusing, in Northern Ireland at least, instead of focusing on the sectarian divide between Protestant and Catholic, it seems that the rioters are focusing all of their hatred and their violence on anyone who is brown, basically, anyone who has come into the country and is living there. And this is what's happening in England as well, although the riots that we've seen in England were apparently sparked by a rumour that the recent stabbing event in England a few days ago was caused by a migrant. Now, this has turned out to be a load of nonsense. This was just a rumour, but of course, with the algorithms on social media, it's spread like wildfire, and before you know it, everybody sees it as a fact, and that is the problem with algorithmic social media. Particularly like X, which is a hotbed of argument and fighting amongst people. So the reasons I think that we haven't seen this happening in Scotland and Wales is simply because we don't have the same attitude to people coming into our country as has been evidenced in some sections of England. Now, this is not by any means the vast majority of English people are engaging in this activity. This is a small number of extreme racists, of white supremacists, of people who just hate anybody who's not white, and are using any excuse to try and incite violence. And on top of that, you get people who are opportunistic, who just like a good fight or want to loot shops or set fire to things. And there have been even some claims online today that this group of individuals who've been inciting this violence have also been sending out information to other extremists on how to make petrol bombs, how to prevent people from escaping from burning buildings. And it is appalling to think that there's anybody out there like that. Now, I know before anybody starts in on me, we all have maybe friends and relations who live in England, and they're not like that. In fact, the vast majority of English people are not like that. But there is a small segment of society down there who does think like that. And Nigel Farage and people like Tommy Robinson are the type of people who enable this to happen. They may not incite it, but like Donald Trump, they fire the starting pistol for those who do. Anyway, it's been a time when people in England, I want to say, let me rephrase that, British nationalists, and let's not say English people, British nationalists, either Scottish or English or anybody else, who have been on the independence channels, have been saying that Scotland can't, shirk its blame for the kind of rioting that's going on, that we in Scotland were responsible for the troubles in Northern Ireland because it was Scots who went over there, Scottish Protestants who went over there and who started fighting against the Irish and the Irish Catholics. Now, technically speaking, that's true, but then again, that would be like the British blaming the Scots who were colonised by England for moving to Ireland to help with the colonisation of Ireland. It's victim blaming, and it's not comparable to what's been going on south of the border in the last few days. There's no comparison whatsoever. These two things are completely different. Whoever's causing the trouble in England is not just an English nationalist. These are people who just hate all people of non-white origin, and there's no other way of saying it. They are just pure racists. So I don't think this is going to happen in Scotland. We don't have a history of this, and we don't have a fear of people coming to live here from other places. Scotland has a huge, massive number of people who've come into Scotland from the Indian subcontinent, from, in fact, all over the world. There's been a large Chinese community in Scotland for hundreds of years, quite happily, completely embedded in society and completely integrated, all part of Scottish society, and have been for decades. In fact, in many cases, 3 and 4 generations at least. So we don't have a history of this, and we don't have a cultural hatred of anything coming from outside of Scotland. So I think it's a false equivalence. We can't compare England and Scotland, or England and Wales even. Forgive me, just an incoming call there. Anyway. Oh, as always, somebody wants to call me in the middle of a programme. I'll come back and answer the call later. Hopefully it will go to voicemail. But anyway, so our health service is healthy, which is a great thing, and Scotland's health service, I hope, will continue to be healthy. The reason we still have the Scottish Health Service is because it is a devolved power. But you might remember that there are problems in England at the moment with the quality of their water. The water companies in the south, particularly Thames Water, have been fined hundreds of times for pouring raw sewage into rivers and watercourses. And of course, these tiny fines, a few £1 million here and there, are just taken as the costs involved in servicing the water industry. They're not really punitive enough. What's necessary is for it to be taken back under public control. Now, we know in Scotland that the water industry here is a nationally owned public sector employer. Our Scottish Water is dealt with by a body which is directly controlled by us and owned by us. And therefore our water bills and our sewerage bills don't go shooting up because there's no profit motive. We're not, our water companies are not there to make a profit, they're there to provide a service. And the only reason we still have that service is because we had a referendum many years ago in which the people of Scotland were asked in a big referendum, and over 1.5 million people voted in it, if they wanted Scottish Water, or the water industry in Scotland, to be privatised, as the Tories have been doing south of the border. And of course the answer was a huge no. Over 97% of Scots said they didn't want their water privatised, and so it wasn't. And so it remains as it is today. And it's just possible, I suppose, if there ever was some kind of British plan to try to privatise the Scottish NHS, that it could be stopped in the same way by having a referendum. Not a referendum on ending the Union, but a referendum on preventing Westminster from trying to privatise a vital utility. Now, while we're on the subject of vital utilities, we have to remember that the power companies which supply our energy, our oil and our gas are not in public hands at all, and yet they should be. And the Labour Party's plans for a so-called British energy company fall very far short of that. It's a tiny, tiny drop in the bucket. The idea that the Labour Party will start a small company which supplies renewable energy, which is basically what they're proposing, is not the same thing as controlling the prices of all energy across the UK. And yet Scotland, with its methodology of using referendums to keep things in public ownership, could and perhaps should have done exactly the same thing with its electricity and gas at the very least, and possibly even its oil, but we never ever did it. But we really should have done. Anyway, I just wanted to come on today, and forgive me for all the various hiccups with today's programme, to say to you that if anybody comes on to you and starts complaining that Scots are just as racist and bigoted as anyone else in the UK, we aren't. We just aren't. We are a colonised country in the same way that Northern Ireland is a colonised country as well, or part of a country that's been colonised. And the fact that British nationalists want to lay the blame in Scotland for what's happening in Northern Ireland, or what happens with sectarianism here, is just a false equivalence, because they're just blaming a country which was colonised and in which some of its poorest members of society way back hundreds of years ago were offered a chance to move to Northern Ireland with promises of big parcels of land if only they would settle there and defend that part of the northern part of Ireland from the Catholic South. But that, again, as I say, just blaming the victims of Scottish colonisation, who were basically induced to move over there and start the Troubles, with the real cause of the Troubles, which was taking over those 6 counties in the first place. Anyway, back to normal, and it should be the end of the silly season in the next couple of weeks when the schools go back and Holyrood and Westminster finally get back into gear and actually start governing the place again. So I think, for the moment at least, unless there's any more nastiness coming from the English Defence League or anybody else, we should have a relatively quiet time. And speaking of quiet times, It was posted today that All Under One Banner has decided to postpone its upcoming march for independence in Edinburgh. I think this is the same event, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the same event which was going to clash with an Orange Order so-called pro-UK march and rally in George Square on the same day. And I think this is a very wise thing for All Under One Banner to do, because if both events happened on the same day, the Independence March in Edinburgh and this pro-UK, in inverted commas, Orange Order sort of parade around George Square would happen on the same day, the BBC would undoubtedly compare these two things and set them against one another. We'd have a pro-UK march in Glasgow, and we'd have what they would call a counter-protest in Edinburgh. Now, this is not true, because the pro-independence rally was never a counter-protest at all. It's simply a march for independence, and it predates the Orange Lodge's potential march and rally in George Square. So I think, again, this was a wise move. It's going to prevent the British media from conflating these two events into one and trying to portray pro-independence marchers as being counter to this pro-UK, allegedly pro-UK demonstration in George Square. And frankly, I'd rather that we didn't have a march at the same time, and I would rather, if possible, that nobody turns up to watch this pro-UK march at all, and that it's just kettled into one place, surrounded by hundreds of police, and just let them play at toy soldiers with their flute bands for a day and clear off. And remember that most of these types of events, these Orange Order marches, they have to import lots of other Orange Order lodges into Scotland to make it look bigger. They do this the other way as well in Northern Ireland. Frequently Orange lodges will be bussed across to Northern Ireland to swell the ranks of the Protestant many over there as well. It's all about appearances, it's about optics. Anyway, that's about it from me today. Apologies for the interruptions to today's programme. I hope you'll stick with me in the future. I'll be back again later in the week when I get the opportunity to talk to you again. In the meantime, keep the faith, and I'll see you soon. Bye for now.